Hey everybody! The purpose of this video is to get you some solutions to this Herbie homework where you're trying to figure out how much this fish weighs. So I remember in class I had brought the net for us to use and a ruler to measure. So the trick, we did most of this part together when we were in class, but the idea here was you had to figure out where his nose was on this net and then where his tail appeared to be. And it's definitely a little tricky. I laid him down on the net to get the idea of the size. I also laid the rod down next to him too. So the trick there is I don't have the fishing rod. The rod's actually not perfect either because it doesn't match up with his tail, but we can ballpark. If you look at the picture, his nose appears to be right about here. And then the end of his tail, if you look at the curve of the net where the rod is, the tail, this is about that big. The tail's going to be somewhere right about here. Okay, so I'm going to mark that point and put the 0 there. Okay, I want to bring it out to here. So depending on how far down that tail went and where his nose is, I get somewhere around 19 inches. I don't know if you can see that there. You probably can't. I get about 19 inches to about where his nose would have been. Okay, but the thing about it is it's an approximation, right? So I had you do 2 measurements. I said, okay, pick a number that's below what the ruler says and above. And the idea of this is I'm trying to get you used to thinking statistically. When you measure something statistically, you often have to give it a plus or a minus to make sure that you try to capture where the true measurement is. So you're not always able to say it's exactly this. You say it's between this and this. So we're going to do that with Herbie. I just called it about 19. I'm going to go with 18 to 20. 18 to 20 as my 2 measurements. So those first 2 measurements there, that's what I would put. Now, the next part is approximating the girth. So if you look at Herbie and he's this long and you turn him sideways, he ends up being a trout that's shaped like an oval. That's his girth. And as it turns out, all trout have a similar ratio. Now, there are rainbow trout anyway. There are definitely going to be anomalies to that, like big fat trout or super skinny trout. But Herbie's a pretty standard looking trout, which is what I mentioned on this. So I said we have to figure out what his girth ratio, or what the girth ratio is when applied to his length. So we know that for any rainbow trout, they have 3 inches of girth for every 5 inches of length. Now we're going to do this measurement twice because you took 2 length measurements. You got a high and a low. Okay, you got a 20 and an 18. So I'll start with the 20. So we know he's got 20 inches of length. For every 5 inches of length, he has 3 inches of girth. So 5 inches is 3, 10 inches is 6, 15 inches is 9, 20 inches is 12. So that would be the girth measurement for the 2 big length. If I called him a 20-inch fish, the girth would be 10 inches or 12 inches around. Excuse me, 12 inches around. Okay? Okay. How about for the small measurement, or the 2 small measurement, 18-inch length? Okay, 18-inch length. Now, if you think about this like we were doing it yesterday, if we're trying to figure this puppy dog out, you can use that skill that we learned in class yesterday, which is this number times that number divided by that number. So you've got 3 inches times 18 inches is going to be 54 inches divided by 5 inches. I'm going to try to do this in my head. 54 inches divided by 5. 50 divided by 5 would be 10. 55 would be 11. I'm going to call it 10.8. Let's see if I'm right. 10.8 inches. Let's make sure I get that right. 54 divided by 5. There we go. 10.8. Now I want you to notice something here too. You've got inches times inches divided by inches. Per our discussion yesterday in class, those can divide off, and that's why you're left with just inches. So now you've got 2 girth measurements. 10.8 inches for the smaller, and a foot of girth for the larger, depending on which one you're going to use. Now the next thing I had you do was actually calculate his weight 2 times. An overweight and an underweight. Okay, now for both of those, what you had to do was you had to do length times girth, and then take all of that and divide it by 800. Now, don't worry too much now. This is going to be more of like a 98, probably more like even like a 105 type thing. When you divide the 800 into this, the number that comes out is pounds. And the only way that could be is if you take inches times inches times inches, which is cubic inches, and then convert it in such a way to turn that into pounds. And like I said, we're getting into a little bit of Math 105 here, so I'm going to leave it go at that. So all we've got to do is do length times girth twice over 800. So the first one would be 20 times 12 times 12. So if I'm doing that in my head right, that's going to be 2,880 cubic inches. I'm going to check that in a second. Actually, I'm going to do it right now. 20 times 12 times 12 is 2,880 cubic inches. Divide that by 800, and that ends up being, oops, I don't know where I just typed that. Divide that by 800, and that ends up being 3.6 pounds. So 3.6 pounds is going to be the biggest Herbie could be. Probably even too heavy. If we do the smaller measurements, which is the 18, so that's 18 times 10.8 times 10.8. Divide that by 800, we get 2.6 pounds. So Herbie is likely between 2.6 pounds and 3.6 pounds in weight. So that's a pretty big fat, if you've ever gone trout fishing, that's a big fat trout. I was stoked to let him go and watch him swim away. Hopefully somebody else got to catch him another day. That's funny, that rhymed. The next part of the homework was a little overzealous. I asked you to convert those to ounces, and I gave you extra credit if you got it right. I'd be more than happy to sit and chat you through how to convert those into ounces if you wanted to, but don't worry, I didn't make enough notes about rounding and things like that, so we're going to let that go. But hopefully that made sense. You can figure out how much a trout weighs just by how long it is, at least close enough for government work. All right, we'll see you in class.